This is Luke Turner, back with another episode of Building a Web App from Scratch. One of the things I want to talk about today before we get started on actually doing anything is I have done another couple commits in the meantime. So last session, which if you didn't catch it, there's VODs available on YouTube. One of the problems that we had was trying to get the DataStar JavaScript library working. And basically what I was trying to do was when you're viewing a page where you're adding a set for an exercise, I only wanted to display the inputs that were relevant to that particular exercise. And so, we wanted to hide some of these inputs depending on what exercise was selected on the front end, the client using JavaScript. And I tried a few things, but ultimately wasn't able to get it working on stream. And so we kind of just moved on and continued working on the feature, which I kind of want to talk about my process a little bit here. Sometimes if I've got a bug where I'm stuck on it, it's better to actually keep moving on the feature, not fixate on solving that particular bug, but keep in the flow state, don't lose the context of what you're working on. And then you can come back to the bug later. Another thing is for me, streaming like this, it's a bit performative, right? It's similar to like pair programming where I'm not as comfortable to just retreat into my head and quietly think for minutes at a time, click around, etc. I'm trying to explain my process, and I'm thinking about my process in a different way as well. Also, like my heart rate is higher, things like that. So after the stream, when my heart rate was lower, I started looking at what was going on a little bit deeper. And I was using things like if we look at these docs, I was going through the docs, comparing them to what I had and trying to figure out what the problem was. And a big part of fixing bugs, well, there's kind of two elements of fixing bugs that I want to talk about right now. One of those is believing you can fix it. Every bug is fixable. There's a reason for it. There's nothing magic going on. There's nothing incomprehensible going on. Even if you don't understand it at the moment, you can understand it. And that kind of mindset is really important to actually being successful at finding and fixing bugs. One of the things I've noticed some developers do is if they try a few things and they don't work, it's almost like they give up or they believe that they can't fix it, that they need to get help. There's nothing wrong with getting help, to be clear. But in order to kind of empower yourself to be a great debugger, you have to give yourself that confidence that you can fix it and that you will fix it, given enough time. The other thing about fixing bugs is having a process. And for me, the best process is a combination of science and intuition. So what do I mean by that? Science, because you're using the scientific process to fix your bug. And the way that works is you're creating a hypothesis about what the problem is. And then you're going to need to do something to evaluate that hypothesis, gather some data. And then based on that data, your hypothesis is either validated or it's not. And either way, you have some new information. So like when I was trying to test this DataStar stuff out, I was looking at it and I was like, why isn't my data show tag working? Maybe it's something about the data show tag. Let's try using the data text tag to just print out my signal value. That also wasn't working. So then my hypothesis is, well, there's something wrong with the signal value itself. Maybe putting the data input, like data bind, on a select wasn't actually working. So I tried a different method of, let's see if it shows it in here, using this data signals to explicitly declare the value of the signal instead of loading it from the select. You're literally just saying the signal value is 1 and trying to show that with data text. And that also didn't work. So at that point, I'm wondering maybe it's my variable name that I'm giving my signal. So I just called it foo, like in some of the examples. And that also didn't work. And so then I'm thinking, well, maybe it's something to do with my HTML. And let's see if I can find, yeah. So I literally copied this example, this exact thing from the docs into my code. And this also didn't work. Instead of actually printing 1 into this div, which is what it's supposed to do, I was getting an error, $foo is not defined. At this point, I've directly copied something from the docs, and it's not working. So that feels to me like my new hypothesis is there's not anything that I'm doing wrong here. There's something happening in the library that's wrong. And that's still probably my fault because I'm the one who's loading and initializing the library. So I'm thinking, maybe I'm initializing it wrong. Maybe the datastar library is not being set up properly. So I look at the getting started. Like, am I missing, do I need to call some kind of function or something when I initialize this? And there's nothing like that documented here. So I'm thinking, well, I'm using the bundled version. Maybe I didn't bundle everything, or maybe there's something wrong with that. So I'm going to try to use this CDN version instead. And then as I was looking at this CDN version, I kind of had an intuitive leap because I saw this. And my heart kind of sank because the version of Datastar that I was using in my app was not that version. It was 0.21.3. So somewhere along the way, after I had installed Datastar, they updated, which happens, and they updated to a 1.0 beta, and the docs are also referencing this 1.0 beta. So by using the code examples in the docs, those examples were actually not compatible with the version of Datastar that I had in my code. And that's why even when I copied the example directly from the docs, it still wasn't working because of this version mismatch. And that's kind of an example of how intuition plays in as well. You can have, like, my new hypothesis then became, well, there's a problem with the mismatched versions. I should try it with this version and see if that fixes it. And spoiler alert, that did fix it. And that combination of science and intuition is how I solve bugs. The intuition is in coming up with a hypothesis and also coming up with a way to find data to support that hypothesis. Those two things are not necessarily obvious. There's no algorithm you can use to come up with these hypotheses or even to understand how to come up with the data. Another example, though, is, setting that specific example aside, that's also what people are doing consciously or otherwise when they're adding logging or using debuggers to step through their code, is they're testing a hypothesis. Maybe you're thinking, well, maybe the data in this data structure isn't quite right. And that's why my algorithm isn't working. And so you add some logging to log what's in that data structure. And then you say, oh, either it is right, so there must be some problem in my algorithm, is your next hypothesis, or maybe it's wrong. And so your next hypothesis is, well, the thing that generated this data structure has some kind of bug in it, or the data in the database is invalid, or something like that. And eventually, you narrow down the root cause. It's a good debugging process. When you really get stuck with debugging is if you have hypotheses that you can't easily test. Like a lot of times if it's a distributed bug having to do with a race condition where you can't replicate it, it becomes really difficult to test your hypotheses. And that's why replication of bugs is so important. Okay. So having said that, let's actually start talking about what I did here. So off stream, after the stream last Saturday, I updated my Datastar version. And as soon as I did that, all of a sudden the examples started working again. And in order to actually test out that they were working and kind of make sure that I wasn't having some other kind of issue that was going to block me in the next stream as well, I built the functionality that we had been trying to build. And let's actually start launching our stuff here and we can demonstrate this. Let's take a look at the README. Do this, db start. Whoops. No. Run the client code, bundler, and then run the server. Give it a moment. And then open the app. Okay, so now we can see the behavior that we had been trying to implement before. When you're going to add an exercise, all you get is an exercise dropdown. And then depending on what you select, some additional fields appear. For this exercise, it has no parameters, so it only shows the reps. For dumbbell curl, I defined a few parameters, and so when you select that, those additional parameters appear. So the user has the opportunity to do that. If I say, add an exercise here and go edit, here we haven't implemented that yet. I only did it for logging an exercise because I just wanted to prove basically that I understood what was going on to myself. I didn't want to do too much work off stream. And so here we can see how it worked before. These other things, distance and intensity, like I can put a number in here, but if I submit it, that number is not actually going to be saved. And that's the kind of confusing element where we just want to hide this input so the user doesn't feel the need to fill it out. Okay, so let's kind of flesh out this thing that I did off stream and make it proper. And also explain it. So that's the today page, right? So there's a few things that we added here. The first is this. Basically, there's two signals involved in understanding what inputs we need to display. The first signal is this new exercise ID, which is bound to the select. So when the user selects a new exercise, this signal will become that new exercise's ID, which is a string value. The actual exercise ID on the back end is a numeric value, but in the front end, because this is just a string passed into the option, that's all it can be is a string, even though it contains a number. We know that, but the library doesn't know that. And we also default that value to an empty string if there's no exercise selected. But just knowing the ID is not enough for us to know what inputs we need. We also need to know the actual content of that exercise. And so that's why we bind the exercises signal to just a plain old JSON object containing all of the exercises. And so then that allows us for each of these inputs to say, show this input if something. And basically what this is doing is finding the current exercise, not just the ID, but the actual object that represents that exercise, finding the parameters on it. And if the parameter has, or if the exercise has a parameter called weight, then we display the weight input. And the same for all the others. Pretty simple. Okay, so there's some things we can do here though. First of all, we have this repeated chunk. This chunk here is the same across all of the different fields. And so we can avoid recomputing that each time and make our code drier by using the data computed property. So let's try to do that. Let's actually look at the docs as well to make sure that we're understanding what we're doing here. if we go reference data computed, this is the kind of thing that we're going to do. So we're going to have something here is probably fine. Data computed exercise equals this. And then we can update each of these to say $exercise instead of needing to use that whole where clause. Let's see how this works. So if we go to today, refresh the page. If we try and add an exercise, the weight doesn't appear as expected. If we select dumbbell curl, it does appear. So this logic is working just the way that we expect. And we can also kind of prove that to ourselves by adding, say, just a simple div data text equals $exercise. And see what it says that that value is. So right now it's undefined because nothing is selected. If we select one, well, we can see that that's an object. That's not very useful. If we stringify that so that it actually logs the object content, we can see that what we're getting here is the exercise. And so for dumbbell curl, the exercise has the parameter weight, and that's why weight appears. Very good. Let's get rid of that. So now we can update these other things to also use that new computed parameter. And that simplifies things a little bit. Okay. However, there's something else that we need to do here as well, which is we want to support the same thing for when we're editing an exercise. And so in order to do that, I'm actually going to need to think about this a little bit because we don't want our signals to overlap at all. So like for instance, naively speaking, what we can do is copy this up here. And, you know, maybe just put it in a new line so that we don't have like an insanely long line here. I don't really know how that works with, let's see if this is going to cause it to throw a fit. Doesn't seem like it. That's good. But, oh, sorry if you can hear that. Something just happened outside. But a problem with this is this exercise computed value, the signal is the same as the signal down here. So it's possible that they're going to clobber each other. Let's see if that happens. So if I have dumbbell curl selected up here, and so these are being displayed. If I select something else down here, let's refresh the page here. I think if I select something else down here, no, it actually isn't clobbering it, which is nice to see. So it's using, oh, actually, right. Before we can tell if it's clobbering it or not, let's add this data show to the fields up top. So the weight field, the assistance field, the distance field, and the intensity field. And so we have weight, assisted, distance, and intensity. One moment. I'm just going to mute my mic for a sec. Sorry about that. So now if we save this and take a look, we can see that like for dumbbell curl, it's only showing reps. If I switch it back to dumbbell curl, it's still only showing reps. If I switch this to dumbbell curl, now this one is showing weight and assistance correctly. So these two signals are coupled together in a way that we don't want. In order to fix that, we just need to rename this exercise signal to something else and the new exercise ID signal. So this is like editing exercise ID, and this is editing exercise. And then here, these are going to be this, 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 and this. And now they should be decoupled. So if we refresh the page again, we have dumbbell curl. We can select, it's not working. One sec. Got to mute myself again. Okay. So the issue here was I didn't update this computed signal to use the editing exercise ID. So now, if I refresh, select, still not working. Let's log what we have here. Editing exercise. So now if I select something here, refresh, undefined, if I select, it's still undefined. So what this is telling me is I forgot to bind the editing exercise to my select, which is right. So I'm just going to do this same pattern here. And this is the editing exercise ID. Okay, so now if I refresh the page and select dumbbell curl. So now we can see that that's working, and it's also showing the correct weight and assistance. And if I select something else down here, they work in a decoupled way. Okay. One little fix I want to do here as well, this data signals exercises, I don't think we need to define it in both places. The list of exercises is constant. And in order to kind of imply that this could be used anywhere in the page, not in a specific form, I'm actually going to move this data signal to somewhere else. We could just put it up here. And then we can get rid of that line for this form. And we can also get rid of that line for this form down here. And I'm going to indent this as well, just for readability. Okay. So now it should still be working on both forms, even though we've only defined that exercises object in one place as one signal. Great. So that's kind of the idea. I think we're, just going to double check that this is right, looks right. I think we're good to go ahead and get rid of this and commit our changes here. So what are we changing? We're moving this up there. We're adding these here. Oh yeah, one other thing I wanted to do as well is this exercise down here, I'm going to call new exercise for consistency with the editing exercise. Okay. So now if I refresh the page again, if I select dumbbell curl, we get the right things. Let's add that. So now we can say, conditionally show or hide fields for editing exercises as well. Great. And just as a test here, if I get rid of this and then click editing on here, so this exercise is currently a dumbbell curl. Is it going to properly do the thing? So it didn't actually, which is interesting. So like, why did this exercise here not select what it should, is the question that I have now. And my concern there is possibly this data bind is also setting a default value. So like, for example, if I set this to, it's always kind of weird when you're like composing these JavaScript things, but let's try doing that and see if that causes it to select it properly. Oh, set.exercise ID. Okay, so now it's selecting it properly. And if I go back to today and then click edit, it's working. And if I switch this to something else and submit that, that's great. And then I can switch it back and set some things and submit that. Okay. Seems good. And this doesn't feel like a new commit. It feels like a mistake that I made in the last commit. So I'm going to amend the last commit with that change, which I can do because I haven't pushed it at all. If you do push commits, to a remote to some other Git repository, and then you amend them, that can be a bit annoying because then the upstream repository actually has the old version of the commit and you have the new version of the commit. And in order to resolve that, there's a few things you can do, but usually you do like a force push, which forcibly overrides the upstream commit to use your version, which if other people are also using that upstream repository, they'll start to get errors and they'll have to do a force pull, and it's just kind of like a bit of a pain. But if you haven't pushed a commit yet, feel free to amend it. That's kind of my policy anyway. It's also why I don't push commits right away. Okay. So we kind of figured out that data star thing. Let's actually delete these before I forget as well. The old versions that we don't need. And then we can kind of move on to the next feature. Now, one of the things as I've been working on this, I was thinking about is really like take this reps thing, value. Let's take a look for a moment at our schema here for exercises. Where is it? I'm looking for the sets. Yeah, sets table schema. So the sets table has these parameters, which, is like that weight, assisted, etc. But it also has reps and duration as top-level columns. Those are added first. Now, I actually think that those should be parameters as well. That feels like the most intuitive model to me. So if we want to do that, let's try basically seeing if we can get a migration to generate some alter table things that are going to drop those columns. And normally, if this was a production app, we would need to be really careful not to drop those columns until we had copied the data into the new place that it was going to live. You can't just drop the data. But because this is an app that I'm just working on in development locally. There is no production data for it yet. It is deployed, but there's no way that somebody could actually have configured this stuff in the deployed app yet. I don't need to worry about that. I can just drop them. So let's see if I do my migration generate. What's it going to generate here? Yeah, so it's just dropping these two columns from the sets table. Cool. And we can't forget to run that migration as well. Excellent. So now we have to update some of our, what's the error here? I've got a problem. Right. So this check also we don't need. And that check wasn't even being used at all. So if I try to generate a new migration again, nothing to migrate. For some reason, those checks are not actually migrated anyway. So deleting that is fine. This is another place where what's the problem here? Oh, just that. So this is another place where we can amend the last commit to fix that issue. Okay. But we probably also have some other code that's referencing those reps and duration. And these are, we'll need to update as well. And kind of generally, we're just going to need to do a bunch of refactoring to get those into parameters. So let's start with this function here. We're just going to set the exercise and the parameters. And there's going to be new parameters, reps, and duration. And this there's no reps in there. Okay. And then we're going to need to do the same thing up here. There's no reps. Instead, those are parameters, reps and duration. And duration, we didn't add any support for at all yet. So that's why we're only cleaning up code related to the reps. That's another advantage of making it a parameter here is, we don't need more special case code around durations either. Okay, let's get rid of the reps there. And then, let's see, I think that might be it. We're definitely going to need to update some views as well, though. Oh yeah, we're also going to need to do this. So this is for the actual exercise, not the sets. So in case you weren't watching last time, kind of the idea is the sets define the values for these parameters, and the exercise defines what parameters are allowed. So for something like pull-ups, you might have assisted parameter or weight parameter, as well as reps parameter. If you're doing jogs, you might have distance and duration as the two parameters. If you're doing jogs with a weighted vest, maybe you have distance, duration, and weight. And the user can kind of configure these on a per exercise basis, which they want to use. So here we're going to do reps, 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 reps. And this is another place where our data type would be just a number. And that's a new data type we're going to need to add. I'll get to that in a moment. But this feels like another place where we could use a little helper function. So let's just define that now. Add parameter, and it's going to have the parameter name and ID and data type. And this is just going to do parameters dot push. Let's copy this. Name, ID, and data type. And then we're also going to wrap this in an if statement here. If rec.body ID, then do the push. And this data type is complaining this data type should be data. Do I have a type for that? Parameter definition dot data type. Yes, I did mean to do that. Are you going to fix it for me? Thank you. So now we can, just reduce our code duplication a little bit here. It also makes it clear the relationship between the property in the body and the ID of the parameter, which isn't necessarily obvious if you're just glancing through these things. So here we could do add parameter reps number. And this is going to give us an error on the number still. And then we're going to do wait, and assisted wait. And then there's distance. And then finally there's intensity. And kind of the idea here is like this intensity is a data type where it could be low, medium, high. Distance is a data type where it's a distance measured in miles or kilometers. Weight is a data type where the unit is pounds or kilograms. Number is a unitless data type. So it's different from weight, even though they're both just a number, because the number doesn't have a unit. If the user switches their thing from metric to imperial or imperial to metric, these other values would need to be updated, but reps does not. That's kind of the idea anyway. We don't actually have support for differences between metrics and imperial in the app yet. Okay, so now we can get rid of all these. And that just makes our code a lot shorter, a lot easier to read. And then we want to add that data type as well. So let's go to the parameter definition. And this is going to be number, the unitless number type. And we also have duration, which I can't forget to add. Let's do duration. And this is going to be I'll just call it a duration. You could call it a time or an interval technically. Usually when you're using like a datetime library, like a time is a point in time. And then if you have a span of time, that can either be called a time span, a duration, or an interval. I'll just call it duration for now for consistency with the name of the actual parameter. Okay. So now we have reps and duration being used as parameters. And we're going to need to update the views. So let's go to the exercise view here. This is where you choose what parameters your exercise is going to have as a user. So if I go manage exercises. Oh, right, I forgot I stopped my server. Let's restart that. Okay. And so here, if I'm editing an exercise, I can choose what parameters I want it to have. And so I want reps and duration to be in this list as well. So let's do that. We're going to have two new fields. This one is going to be called reps. Probably want reps on the top. Reps. And then we also have duration. Duration. And got to update this as well. Reps. Duration. Does that look right? I think so. Okay, so now if we refresh the page here, we've got reps and duration. which we can check off. So for this example, let's say dumbbell curls, you're going to have reps and weight. It's pretty standard. So let's update that. Didn't seem to, the weighted one is not working. So let's take a look at that. So I think this should be called weight, not weighted. There's some inconsistency there. And also, if we look at the back end, assisted is fine. I kind of wish that was called assistance instead, but I'm not going to update that right now. So now let's see if I check off weighted. Is it still not working? Okay, that is working. So then if I go back here, weighted is checked off. So we have reps and weighted. If we go to today, if we edit this, we see reps and weight, but I'm going to update this to weight as well. And I'm going to update this to assistance or assisted weight, just to make it clear what we're talking about here. So now if I go to the page where we're actually editing these things, we need to update the reps and distance to actually use the same pattern as these others. And probably the way to do this actually is going to be with a kind of a for loop. So let's say like each parameter in some kind of exercise, and I'm going to figure that out in a moment. For each parameter, we're going to want to show an input for that parameter. And so here's kind of an interesting thing. We know the editing exercise in the JavaScript, but in the actual Pug template, this exercise here should be, I guess, set dot exercise, but then that's not really right because it's not just the exercise parameters for that particular set. We kind of want to iterate over like all of the possible parameters that are out there, which we don't really have a list of all of the possible parameters. So let's actually just define that. I think that'll be a useful thing to have. Or let's call it all parameters. And then if we, so this is in the today page, we're going to need to pass in a list of all parameters into that page. And this is something we'll probably want to do in other pages too in the long run, but for now, I'm just going to do it here. But what I might do is expose it as a thing in the model. And so here we're going to return an array of objects. And each object is going to have an ID, a name, which I guess is the capitalized version. ID is a lowercase version, and a data type. Okay. And we're going to do that for all of the parameters here. And this will actually reduce our duplication a lot once we start using this function in various places. A lot of that code that we have like 5 copies of the same line, we can replace with a for loop over this array. So we have weight, assistance, assisted, and then we have reps, which is a number. We have distance, which is a distance. We have duration, which is a duration. We have intensity, intensity. I'm looking forward to not having to keep retyping all of these things. Okay, weight, assisted, reps, distance, duration, intensity. Is that, if I look down here, weight, assistance, reps, duration, distance, intensity. So we have them all. And, you know, we probably, the order doesn't necessarily matter too much, but if we do something like that, fine. And so then in this today page, we could say, or was it the today page we were working on? Right, yes. We could say all parameters equals all parameters. And maybe I'll just actually put this right into the view so that we don't have something clobbering the all parameters variable name or shadowing it technically. Okay, so now in that today page, we can iterate through all parameters, and we can have the label be the parameter.name. We can have this be a string that's composed server side with the parameter.id. And then this is going to be id equals parameter.id. The type is going to be computed based on the data type of the parameter, but for now we're just going to leave that as a number because we're not too worried about that yet. The name is also the parameter.id. And the value is the set.parameters at that parameter.id. Yes, something like that. And then all of these, oh yeah, actually we're going to need to handle the intensity case, especially. So let's say underneath the control, let's say if parameter.data type equals intensity, then this. Otherwise, this. Okay, let's see. Oh, it signed me out. That's interesting. Let's see what this looks like now. So we do get the weight and the reps. It shows up twice because I haven't deleted the old code yet, but this is looking pretty good. If I go manage exercises, dumbbell curl, and I add intensity, and then I go today, we see the intensity again in both places, which is fine. Let's actually delete this old stuff here so that we don't have the duplication. And so now, you know, we've avoided having to redeclare a ton of fields on top of each other by using this for loop. Yeah, Pug is an acquired taste, you could say. I have mixed feelings about it myself. On the one hand, there's a lot less typing. On the other hand, if you do use something like Emmet, for example, to accelerate your HTML typing, it's really not that much less typing to use Pug. But as you know, with the terseness of a templating language that's designed to reduce characters, it's like you naturally get a lot more kind of confusing syntax involved. The other thing about this particular app is we have this combination of front-end and back-end templating and logic with like generating JavaScript like this, which is really not ideal. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's ugly. Usually if I'm building an app like this for realsies, so to speak, I would use something like React, but I'm deliberately not using React in order to experiment with some new things. Okay, so then we also need to do the same thing down here in order to, reduce our duplication again. And it's like this, yeah. And down here, instead of editing exercise, this is going to be using the new exercise signal. Yeah. I actually have, it's funny, I have Copilot installed. I also have Line installed, which is like a chat-based thing. And I also have Cody installed. So I have 3 different AI-powered development tools extensions installed right now, but I'm not using any of them. And part of that is because I'm not sure if that's that valuable for streaming. Like I kind of want to be writing the code myself and talking through the reasoning for it instead of just like you watching me interact with an AI. But one thing I really dislike, actually, just as a personal thing, is the autocomplete settings. Like if you have the AI-powered IntelliSense completions, I have that disabled because I just find it really distracting. It's like, it's like if you're having a conversation with somebody and they keep trying to finish your sentences for you. Whenever you pause, it's like they try and guess what you were going to say. And a lot of times I'm like, no, that's not what I was going to say. I was actually going to say something slightly different, but maybe not different enough that I like want to correct you, but maybe I do. I don't know. And it's like it kind of jams my brain a little bit when those completions pop up. So maybe that's just something I need to get used to, but I'm not a fan. But I do like the chat-based AI type stuff, where it's like you just tell the AI you want to add a feature, and especially with the new agentic ones, like where it's using like agent behavior, where it's going to actually decide what tasks to run and then run those individually, like to look up context and then make the changes, etc., and then test the changes as well. That's a really cool workflow, but it doesn't feel quite right for streaming, at least not yet. Yeah, I mean, it might be something where it's kind of like I just need to get used to it. I don't know. But in the meantime, I'm not a huge fan. We recently got the ability to use Copilot at work as well, which, is part of the reason that I've been experimenting with it. So I am able to actually use it at work if that feels valuable. We've got like some kind of agreement that the code's not going to be shared or spread around. Okay. Anyway, what was I doing? So we're updating the create a new exercise thing to use the for loop deal. So new exercise, and then this has to be updated to, there is no default value for these because it's brand new. And then same thing here, these don't need selected. Just like down here, there's no selected state yet because again, we're creating a brand new exercise, not rendering a form for an existing one. Yeah, and then that should be about right. So then I can get rid of all of these, all this code. And we're a little drier. And even this, I mean, so we have this same piece of code there basically and here. Not exactly the same, but close. With Pug, there's a functionality called a mixin that you can use where it's kind of like a little function in your view. And I might eventually update some of these to use mixins to reduce the duplication even more. But in the meantime, I'm just going to keep going with this. Let's see what changes we actually have here, because we kind of made a pretty big commit. Yep. And so for a lot of these things as well, I want to, before I totally forget, we can for loopify some of these using the all parameters object that we created earlier, or array. So it's not ideal, but like if we say, if we get rid of this and we just have parameters be an object, and then we can say like for parameter of all parameters, parameters equals parameters, maybe parameter dot.id. Yeah, okay. And really, we don't even need this maybe parameter because we're putting this all in a for loop. So let's actually take this kind of thing and put it down here. And we're going to say if this, then parameters id equals rec.body id. Then we can get rid of this as well. And, you know, yeah, I'm sure there's a better way to do this with less mutability, but not going to worry about that for the moment. And this is a record of string. Okay. So basically we're saying what this is doing is creating a new set. And we're saying for each parameter, I mean, really, I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know, we could just iterate over the parameters in the exercise. That's probably a better way to do it. We don't even need all parameters here. Exercise.parameters. Or we could do like, use the null coalescing operator there. And then we can get rid of that if statement altogether, I think. So basically now we're saying for each parameter that the exercise has, the set should also have a parameter with that ID. And the value for that should be the, you know, whatever's passed in the body for that parameter. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, and we're probably going to use that same code down here. I think we can just get rid of all of this. Except for we need the parameters object as well, which I'm just going to copy from above again. Copy pasting is my crutch for not using Copilot. Okay. So with that, let's see, what other, like if I search for reps, okay, so we have this other place where we're also doing something for each parameter. And in this case, it's when you're creating a new exercise. And so here we could do like, or here we are going to need to iterate over all parameters of all parameters. And then we're going to just run this logic. And then we can get rid of all of this. And this name is going to be parameter.name. ID parameter.id, and data type is parameter.data type. So now I'm just thinking I can just push the parameter. Probably the best way to do it. And this isn't happy because the property of data type. So basically what this is telling me is over here, I should declare a return function, a return value for this function as parameter definition array. And so that way TypeScript knows that the types are supposed to match up. And we've made our code a lot simpler. Let's see if we haven't introduced a bunch of problems. So if we go manage exercises, edit, we've got our list of parameters here. We should be able to check off them. Okay, so see, we already have a problem where even if I'm checking them off and clicking update, it's not actually doing it. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Look at the network tab. So say we check off reps and duration and we update. So reps is on, duration on. And then if we look back over to the so it's this one here. First of all, I can get rid of this function. And so for some reason, this isn't actually building up the parameters properly, I think. Let's see what we're getting. If I check off wait and click update, parameters is still an empty object. Oh, right. So I see the problem here probably. This should be parameter.id. It was using this ID up here, which is the wrong ID. Now if I check off wait and click update, we've got the wait parameter and it's continued to be checked off. And they're all continued to be checked off. Awesome. Okay, so now if I go back to today and I try to edit this dumbbell curl, it should have all of them here. Reps, weight, assisted weight, distance, duration, intensity. There's 6 of them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, so we've got all of them here. And if I put a value in each of these and submit that, reps, weight, assisted, distance, duration, intensity, awesome. Cool. And so if I go down here, we've got all of them as well. Great. So this is going to make it a lot easier. You know, if I do want to add a new parameter in the future, there's only one place that I'm going to need to actually update, and that's this list of all parameters. So let's see what we've got here. I think this is pretty much all one commit. Make reps and weight, or reps and distance parameters. Also make parameter handling code more generic. So again, I could split this into 2 commits, maybe if I wanted to, where one is adding reps and distance, and then the other one is like making it more generic, but I'm not actually going to worry about that. If I was collaborating with other people on this project, or if I really wanted the ability to explicitly roll back the different commits. Hey, Maria. I am building an exercise tracking application. So you can see the app over here. Basically, this is, the idea is that people can define exercises that they want to track. And then these exercises can have some different parameters on them. And then for, you know, when they do those exercises, like at the gym or at home or whatever, they can log that information here, put values for the parameters, and track that over time. It's kind of the idea. The app is still in a pretty early state, so it's not the prettiest, but ultimately I kind of want people to be able to see over time how the exercises, you know, like the weight increased over time or whatever with charts and things like that. But that's basically the idea. Think of it as just like any other exercise tracking app. There's nothing really special about this one. And kind of the main reason that I'm doing this is to share my process and kind of explain how I think about building an app. And, maybe people find it interesting. Okay, where are we? Let's make the commit. Okie doke. So let's look at my notes here. Notes file, I got some tasks. So we just did this one, make reps duration into parameters. That's good. Quick time check. Probably going to be going for about another hour. So one of the next things that I kind of want to do is create like a settings page. And sort of the reason for that is, as the user using this app, there's things that I might want to be able to configure, like whether I want to use metric or imperial units, or whether I, if I want to delete all my data. Like one problem with this app right now is the user, as soon as the user creates their account, they don't have any ability to delete that account anymore. They're stuck with it, which, if somebody's trying to clean up their online presence or whatever, that can be annoying. I personally get annoyed by that as a user. So that's something we could do. Another thing we could do is update responsive, like test responsive behavior. So like currently this might kind of work in a mobile layout, but it's definitely not going to be perfect. So that's something we could improve. Let's actually do that for now. So let's take a look at this. Inspect. And part of the reason that I want to do the mobile layout is because I'm kind of assuming a lot of times when people are logging their exercises, they're going to be doing that from their phone, from the gym, or whatever. Even if they're at home, people are not going to be opening the app on their computer in order to track their exercises, or we don't want them to have to, right? So having mobile support is an important feature for this app. So we can kind of see what this looks like using this mobile layout feature of our DevTools. And dimension here, just pick one. And we can see this looks pretty weird. One of the problems you can kind of see here, there's a lot of problems. Let's start there. But one of the problems is the header just has the exercise tracker. It doesn't have any of the other buttons. If we switch out of the mobile layout, there's today, there's manage exercises, sign in, sign out. But in the mobile layout, those are gone. And I believe that's because of Bulma trying to be smart and kind of expecting something that's not there. So let's take a look at this. Bulma, by the way, is the CSS framework that I'm using for the front end for this app. So it's basically just a set of components that, can give your page a consistent layout without you having to write a ton of CSS. I'm using Bulma specifically just because I've used it in the past, and one of the nice things about it is it doesn't have any dependencies on any types of JavaScript frameworks or Tailwind or anything like that. It's a totally standalone CSS framework that's literally just distributed as a single CSS file, or it can be. So very easy to include in your app, even if you're not doing a lot of JavaScript, which I've been trying to avoid just because I'm so used to doing apps where it's like totally JavaScript that we're doing something a little different. Okay. So anyway, there's a navbar component, which is what we're using for that top page, like this. And the thing about the navbar is when it's collapsed, it's going to show this burger menu instead. And the problem is that we haven't actually defined a burger menu on our like in our code at all. So we kind of want to put this in there. And let's see, so that would be in the layout. This is the nav bar. So underneath here, we would have a burger. It has to appear as the last child of navbar brand. So that would be here. And because we're using pug, I'm not really just going to copy paste this. I'm just going to use that as a kind of an example and then delete it. But we've got a.navbar burger. Roll button. Aria label menu. Aria expanded false. And then inside that, we're going to have span aria hidden true. 4 of those. Okay. So now with that, if we refresh this, oops, what did I just do? Switch it back. So now we actually have that burger menu there. It's kind of weird that it's blue. Not a huge fan of that. It is the last child of navbar brand. Okay, well, we can worry about that later. And then the navbar menu So the navbar menu is what we have here, and this is what's going to be shown on our non-responsive layout, or our full desktop layout. For the mobile layout, we're going to need some actual JavaScript to implement some kind of dropdown. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. So here's where we can use some more data star. So this would be data on click, I believe. And then we could say nav menu, or let's say show nav menu equals true. And kind of to explain that, if we go over to data star here, if we do data on, we're doing kind of a pattern similar to this, where we're going to be updating a signal value on the client whenever this is clicked. And I guess really this should be like just toggling the value back and forth whenever it's clicked. And then under here, we're going to want to change, we're going to want to set this is active class, I guess, based on whether the navbar is expanded or not. So I believe there's a data class that we can use to add or remove a class based on the signal. So here we can say, let's put it at the end here, data class is active, something like that. Is true when that signal is true. Let's see how this looks now. So if I click it and inspect, it's not actually updating the class, it seems like. If I look at the console, do we have any errors? Yeah, show nav menu is not defined. Okay. So it's possible that I need to define a default value for this. So if I do like data input show nav menu equals false, I believe is what it is. And then if I refresh this, do we still get that error? Yes. So what is the problem here? Oh, is it called something else? Data signal? Yeah, data signals, show nav menu. Okay, refresh. If I can find my mouse. Okay, so now we don't have a console error. That's a good sign. If I click it, it switches to an X. So now we can toggle that back and forth, but it's not actually showing the menu at all. And I wonder if Bulma has a... So kind of the way that this is describing it is we have a class navbar menu. I mean, this is a bit interesting. So like say, let's look at this right now. Let's look at the actual HTML here. So we have this navbar menu, but it's defined as is it hidden or what? Like, why isn't it showing at all? Here, navbar menu display none. If we uncheck that, it pops up. Okay, that's interesting. And so we would kind of need to add this is active toggle to that as well, I think. Now if I click that, the menu shows and hides. Great. So that's like one mobile improvement. Now people should be able to switch between pages on their mobile app. But there's another issue, which is kind of that the UI, it's not the right size. I think that there's some kind of fancy meta tag that we're supposed to do for that, but I can never remember what it is. Let's see if Google can help me figure it out. Yeah, this thing. Let's see if this helps. So if I'm over here in my layout, if I do meta viewport content equals width device width, initial scale 1. What does that do now? Okay, so now it's actually making things the proper size, which is nice to see. And I can manage my exercises. It kind of works. I can edit this. So this page hasn't been updated to actually use any Bulma components really, so that's part of why it doesn't have the proper padding or anything. Today, I mean, again, it kind of works. So let's actually commit these changes. Update layout to work on mobile screens as well. Okay. I guess yeah, I mean the ARIA expanded thing being false, that should probably be toggled to true. But I kind of don't really want to deal with that right now either. I think that's mainly for like a screen reader. But suppose I did want to. So if I did like, I think that would be like data atter. Yeah. So let's actually just do that. So we could do data atter aria expanded would be set to show nav menu. And so then if I refresh this page, so this has I don't actually see the aria expanded thing on it. Okay, there. Oh, so if it's false, it's not showing up at all. I see. So this would be something like toString. Is that a thing on a Boolean? Like if I does one have a REPL? Yeah, that's what I want. Feels kind of weird, but that should work. Okay, so now if I refresh the page again, so it's not putting the default value on there. But then if I do this, it's still, the false is not, like I kind of want it to actually show up always if it's false. I wonder if there's some special syntax for that. I don't know. For now, I'm just going to do this, set the default value to false, and that will kind of work. I don't really know how screen readers work. They might be okay with this kind of behavior, but at least it says true when it is expanded. It's good enough for me for now. And I'm going to amend my last commit. Okay. Okay, so pretty simple there. I'm actually going to check this off. I mean, there's a lot more we could do for the responsive behavior. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that that's blue. But again, I mean, that's blue too. Ultimately, I'm not too worried about getting like a beautiful UI yet, basically. Still trying to just build out the functionality. Okay. And kind of similarly here, so that undefined reps thing, that is some code that I should take out. So this set.reps should be, I'm just going to take that out altogether for now. That was just some debugging I had in there. Or not really debugging, but just an alternative for actually making a UI for this. And I mean, I could do, let's go ahead and do that now, actually. So we can say each parameter in set.parameters. We can do something. I'm just going to do a simple paragraph where that's going to be the parameter.name. And then actually the set.parameters is an object. So really I would do like object.entries set.parameters. Can I destructure this, I wonder? Probably not. Let's see if Pug lets me do that. Refresh. Yeah, okay. Doesn't like that. So I would have to do like parameter. So this would be like parameter 0 and parameter 1. Because object.entries is returning a tuple of the key and the value for each property in the object. So now we actually get a nice, kind of nice thing there. But as we can see, it's using the ID for the thing instead of like the human readable text label. So I might actually refactor this again. This is going to iterate through all of the parameters. Whoops, no, go away, Copilot. And for each of the parameters, if set.parameters parameter, then the parameter.name is the value from the set. So let's see what this looks like now. Oh, this would be parameter.id, right? Okay, see what it looks like now. Okay, so now we have the proper name, but the value, oh yeah, this has to also be parameter.id. Okay, so now, we have something better than JSON. So let's get rid of that. And display parameters values for sets without JSON. And part of the reason that I'm not putting too much thought into exactly what this should look like is because ultimately we're probably going to want to do something that's consistent with the UI of the rest of the app and kind of the design theme for the whole app, which isn't something that I've really fleshed out yet. So we're just going to include something that works, and that's good enough for now. Okay, let's check our notes again. So one kind of interesting thing we could add would be dark mode support. But again, I'm not super worried about that yet. Bulma does have dark mode, and I could set that up. The only reason I'm thinking about doing that is because usually it's better to have things like dark mode set up earlier rather than later. The earlier you do it, the less you have to refactor your whole app to support it. Let's actually just take a look at this. Dark mode. So you can use data theme dark or class theme dark. So just as an example here, if I go to my layout page and I do HTML data theme dark, let's see how terrible this looks. Ta-da, dark mode. It's actually not that bad. Where is my cursor? What the heck happened to my mouse? Okay, here it is. It disappears as soon as I move it over the thing. Oh, because it's replacing it with that little touch circle. Let's get rid of the responsive mode. Okay. So, I mean, this doesn't look terrible, actually. If I go managed exercises, dumbbell curl, I mean, somebody can use it. Some things are clearly not quite right. Like the contrast on this button isn't good. The delete button isn't even using a Bulma button at all, so that's not working well. And like if I do this and then I try and click on this thing, that's okay. So, I mean, it's not really terrible here. So one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like how, like suppose I remove this data theme dark. Is Bulma going to dynamically detect my browser settings? So I can switch this to dark here. Oh no, that's not right. I want to use the Chrome color scheme. How do I get Chrome to render this on dark mode? Not really sure. I mean, you can change your like OS level settings, but I don't really want to do that. Let's see. New tab page, select Customize Chrome. At the bottom right. Wow, okay. Dark. So if I do that, and I refresh this, so it's not actually detecting that my Chrome settings is set to dark. Kind of what I want my app to do is just pick what the browser is asking for. But it's like the preference isn't being, do I need to like shift refresh maybe? No. Yeah, I don't really know how that works. Well, whatever. Let's just switch it back to device for now. At least we could tell that it's not terrible in dark mode. You can have like a button, you know, that the user could use to toggle that. Maybe I'll add that just for testing purposes, I guess you could say. So here we're going to do, because the button is going to change the value of this attribute dynamically, we're going to use data attr again. So this would be like data attr data theme equals theme. And then we would add a button. I'll just add it here. For now. And when this is clicked, we're going to set theme to well, let's actually just say theme equals dark for now. And we're also going to need to add the signal, the default signal value for that. Theme equals light. And let's just start with this and see if that signal wiring is working. So if I click switch theme, did it switch it? No. Do we get an error? No. What if I do a thing here where it's like data text equals theme? What is the problem here? data signals theme equals light. Maybe does this have to be quoted? Sometimes that's a little confusing. Theme is not defined. Do these, I wonder if this doesn't actually work on that actual HTML. Just out of curiosity, if I put it here on the nav, yeah, so it's here we can see it's getting that data star ID. So I think that doesn't work on the HTML attribute itself. It might need to be on the body. Does that help? Well, it does help, kind of. But the problem now is that it has to be on the HTML to actually look proper, it seems. So if I switch to dark, it switches, but the HTML attribute isn't actually updated. Doesn't have much to say about that. Let's see. Didn't see anything good there. Is there something in here? Really? Okay, well, let's worry about that later. But basically the idea the other thing I could maybe try is using the class thing that Bulma supports as well. So instead of using data theme, I could use class theme dark. So that would be like data class theme dark. Is when theme equals dark. Does that work? Let's see. Switch it to dark. And no, it doesn't update it. Okay. So, we almost need to do something like document.query selector HTML dot set attribute theme data theme dark. Let's see, is that going to do something? Yeah, so that works. So we can do it without actually taking advantage of signals, unfortunately, but that's all right. So here we can say, I'm going to do an if or a show. So let's have two of these, and it would be like data show. Well, actually, let's just do one. It's probably easier. Well, let's do two. So this one's going to set that, and it's also going to set theme equals dark, because we're also going to use a signal in some places. Theme equals light. Light. And going to show this if theme equals dark. So the idea here is, if the theme is dark, we're going to give the person the option to switch it back to light. If the theme is light, we're going to give them the option to switch it to dark. And get rid of this data text. Don't need that. Let's see how this works now. Refresh. So dark theme, light theme, dark theme, light theme, dark theme, light theme. Awesome. Seems all right. And this is where, if I wanted to make this take up a bit less space, I could put in like an emoji instead. This could be like a moon emoji. And then this could be like a sun emoji. A lot of times this is kind of the way an app will do it, is just have like a little button like that, and you can use it to switch back and forth. I don't really like that the sun emoji is not also yellow. But whatever. I mean, that's a consequence of the font and the operating system that decides exactly what these emoji look like. Okay. So we're going to add dark mode toggle. Okie doke. Not bad. And another thing for that, a lot of times that would be in a footer, not a header. And I've been thinking about, I should probably make a footer for this app. So maybe let's add that now as well. I think Bulma has some kind of footer component that we might want to use. Yep, okie doke. Hopefully it's not too complicated. So in the layout, underneath our content block, but inside the container, I believe, we're going to want a div.footer, or no, a footer.footer. And then inside this, there's going to be a div.content. And has text centered is what they're doing, which makes sense for me as well. And then in there, let's do next. See what this looks like. Okay, so that's the footer down there. Looks kind of weird because it's not actually on the bottom. Sort of wish that it was. But the only real way that we could do that is by having the content be in a block that is expanding to fill the available space. So like, for example, we have this container, and the container is kind of defining this vertical width. But we also sort of want to use I wonder if there's a thing for this. I mean, basically, like we could consider using like a flexbox, like a vertical flexbox column type of thing is probably what I would go for. Or we could maybe use don't really want to use a smart grid. Yeah, let's see if what we can do with Flexbox here. So if we do, and we could just put some CSS, but I'm going to see how far we can get just using the Bulma classes. So if we say our container is flex, and flex direction, so it would be like is flex direction column. Okay. And let's see what that looks like just for starters. Is that going to mess everything up? No. And now what we have is the body container computed has flex grow, flex direction column, flex grow 1, and display should be flex. Do we need is flex as well? Yeah, so now display is flex. Okay. And then we're going to want a is flex grow 1 on the content block. So we're going to need a div here that the content goes in. And so now with that, this has flex grow 1. And these other things should have flex grow 0, but I don't think we need to specify that. And then the other thing we're going to need is the container has to be height, the full height of the page. And you know, there's like, it's arguable whether it's worth the effort to do this, but I do kind of like it. I don't want margin. I want size. I don't know. Let's just add the style to it for now and see if we can make it work. And then we can maybe make it work better later. So style here is min height 100 view height. Let's see what that looks like now. Okay, yeah, so that's kind of more what I was thinking would be good. So the footer is actually at the bottom. And kind of the idea here is this container will at minimum take up the whole page. And because it's a flex, the sub elements can define how much they grow or shrink based on the flex grow property. So the nav doesn't grow at all. The footer doesn't grow at all. And so all of the additional space is taken up by the main content. But if we were to say add another exercise and then add another exercise, so you can see now that it is starting to scroll, which is what we like to see. I kind of want some margin on the footer now, though. So let's put some margin top MT dash 4 probably is good. MT4. And now if we look at this, there's some space there for between the footer and the thing below it. Now I actually want to put even more, it looks like. Let's do MT6. Where am I at? Here. MT6. Yes. Refresh. Okay. And if I delete these, yeah, we're still looking good. So this is kind of not bad. Now we need to actually put stuff in the footer. So one thing that we talked about we wanted to have in here is the light and dark thing. So let's move that down in here. And ultimately we'll, make this better as well. But another thing I'd like to put in here is like a copyright, which I guess I need to do like this. Is that right? What's that going to look like here? Not happy. I can never remember how to just put like plain old text. It's like that, right? Isn't that what I did? Let's try that. Okay. Yeah. And then, so that's going onto a new line for some reason. Don't really understand that. Oh, probably because of this navbar item. I don't need that on there. Okay. Yep. And then, you know, we want a little bit of spacing as well. Cool. And one other thing I like to put in the footer often is like a link to the GitHub. So like if I do ref, let's actually just copy it from GitHub here. So source code. And then kind of want some padding. Let's just do like margin. Let's do it over here. Margin right 1. How does that look? Not bad. And then down here, we could do the same thing. Margin left 1. And then we can get rid of our trailing space. And it should be, you know, kind of a thing. I mean, again, far from perfect, but we're making progress. Okay, let's see. Got about 7 minutes left here before I'm going to be signing off. That's probably enough time to do one more little feature of some kind. Let's take a look at our notes here. Check off dark mode support. Let's go ahead and update the README. That's probably a good way to round off our time today. So let me think. Usually when I have a README, the first thing I like to have is a brief description of the app and what it does. So let's put that in. And we could say features. Users can define their own exercises with various parameters: weight, distance, duration, etc. Can log sets of exercises on a daily basis. Mobile friendly UI with dark mode support. Sell ourselves a little bit here. And then I might just add a note. I'm building this app on stream at twitch.tv/Luke Turner SW. I think that's the right URL. Is that right? Yeah, cool. Let's get out of here before we infinitely recurse. Okay, so then we have usage instructions. I'm going to call this local development instead. As a regular user, you don't need to worry about these commands. This is only when somebody is contributing to the app. So let's say then to run the app in development mode, you need the Postgres server, the client code bundler, and the server, and the bun server, or express server, let's call it that, running. Then you can visit the app at localhost 3000. Okay. And the reason I said then is because we're going to have something about initial setup here. To get started developing contributing you need first to clone it. It's always the first step. I like to include that in my instructions, even though it is arguably kind of obvious, just because it makes it really clear. And then clone it and run initial setup commands. So first you're going to need to clone it. Then you're going to need to do bun run db create. Bun run db create. Dependencies. Bun podman docker. And then bun run migrate run. What is it called? Oh, just migration run. Okay. So you need to create the database, and kind of the idea here, like the db create command is actually creating a Docker image, or a Docker container, I should say, using the Postgres image. And that's going to be what we use for local development. If I can actually bring up my Podman desktop window here to kind of illustrate that really briefly. So I have this exercise tracker DB container running. And once that's created then you just need to start it. So you just need to run the db create once when you're first setting things up. Migration run as well, like that'll actually create all the tables and everything in your database. So you have to run that first as well. Okie doke. Let's get rid of those spaces. And I mean, Git also kind of a dependency here. Oh yeah, the other thing you're going to need to do is install, bun install. To get all the dependencies. Okie doke. What else do we want to include in here? Sign in with GitHub. And that's good for now. This app is deployed to fly.io. It's a pretty old version of it because I haven't been deploying it as I go. I only deployed it at the beginning to kind of test it out. But if I go to like exercisetracker.fly.dev, this is actually an old version of the app. But this isn't a long-term URL. I don't really want to like encourage people to visit here because ultimately I'm going to create like a permanent URL for this with a custom domain name, a subdomain of luketurner.org, which is my website. So like for the Dust app that I built, dust.luketurner.org, this is like in a subdomain that I control, and it's not dependent on what kind of backend technology is running it. Like if I wanted to deploy it on something other than Fly, I can just rename or, point the CNAME record for this DNS name to another place, and that will work. Whereas with this URL, it's tied to Fly, which I'm not a huge fan of. Also, I haven't actually set up the sign in with GitHub thing in the cloud yet, because you need a different OAuth application set up with a different callback URL. So like if I click this, it's not going to work. So kind of have to fix that, which I also kind of need to do off stream because I'm going to need to be copy pasting some secrets. But yeah, just kind of holding off on that right now. It doesn't need to be deployed yet because there's no value to anybody to use it yet. So for now, this is probably an okay start for the README. Just call it update README. Don't need to be specific here. Okay, I think that's probably a good stopping point here. Let's push this. And we can kind of see in GitHub now, if we refresh this, that, we've got a more interesting README here. I also like to add screenshots to a README. It really helps people see what the app is like instead of just trying to explain it. But again, it's not actually ready yet. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time creating screenshots that I'm just going to need to recapture as things change. All right. Well, I guess with that, thanks, y'all, and I'll see you next week.